because everything about the Enneagram is about that why, it's about that motivation. Once we understand what is driving our behaviors, we can start to understand why we're stuck and hopefully then utilize that knowledge to unstuck ourselves.
Welcome to Season of Stuck, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the all-too-human experience of feeling stuck. I'm your host, Deanna DeBera, and on this podcast, we explore all things stuck. How and why stuckness happens, what it feels like, how to learn and grow from it, and ultimately, how to get unstuck and move forward in an authentic, empowered way. If you are looking for insights, support, and community as you make your journey from stuck to unstuck, you're in the right place. Now, let's jump into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Season of Stuck. If this is your first time here, hi, my name is Deanna. I am your host, and I am a person that has experienced a lot of stuckness. Like a lot. So, if you have also felt or currently feel stuck, welcome. You have definitely landed in the right place. And if this is not your first time here, welcome back. I can't say it enough. Thank you for tuning in each week. I mean it when I say that it is an honor and a privilege to be a part of your journey from stuck to unstuck. So, thank you for showing up and giving me that opportunity. So, today we are talking about something that has been so helpful for me in my life, whether that's in my relationships, in my personal growth, or in helping me get unstuck. And that is the Enneagram. In case you're not familiar, the Enneagram is a personality typing framework. We're going to take a much deeper dive into all things Enneagram later in the episode, but just to give you a basic overview, the Enneagram categorizes people into one of 9 different personality types, numbered 1 through 9, and then explains not only the characteristics of each type, but also their core motivations, fears, and desires, all of which play a huge part in driving their behavior, thinking, and overall way of moving through the world. So, in other words, the Enneagram doesn't just give insights into who a person is or what they do. It also gives insights into why they do the things they do and feel the way they feel. And that can be hugely helpful in understanding not only what drives our own behavior, but also why other people behave the way they do, which can support us in getting unstuck in our relationships, both with ourselves and with others. I am an Enneagram 2, which is known as the helper. At a core level, 2s just want to be loved, valued, needed, and appreciated. And their biggest fear is being unloved or unwanted. And that can manifest in some really beautiful ways. As the helper title suggests, 2s are generally really helpful in giving people, and they're always looking for ways to better show up in their relationships. They're the person that is going to volunteer to help you move, or send you a random text just to tell you how amazing you are, or stand by your side when you're having a hard time. They're warm, they're kind, they're great at seeing the best in other people, and they get real joy from their relationships and prioritize fostering a sense of closeness and connection within those relationships. But on the flip side, 2s can also have some struggles. For example, because they so deeply want to be loved, they are prone to people pleasing and have a tendency to put other people's wants and needs above their own, which can lead to feelings of resentment or feeling taken advantage of. Or, as mentioned, because they really want to feel needed, it can lead to them overdoing it in relationships in an attempt to make themselves indispensable to other people. And I can definitely say that all of this tracks for me. I think I'm a pretty good example of the strengths that come along with being a 2, or at least I try to be, and I'm absolutely prone to a lot of the pitfalls that 2s can find themselves facing. But knowing and understanding why I have those strengths and why I can fall victim to those pitfalls has been so, so helpful, including for when I'm feeling stuck. For example, if I find myself feeling stuck in resentment, it is a big red flag that I am likely doing something in my relationships to foster that resentment, like saying yes to people when I want to say no. Or if I find myself stuck in the story that people don't like me or want me around, which is a much more frequent story than I would prefer or am proud of, it's helpful to remind myself that the reason I get stuck in that story is because it speaks to my deepest fear. And if I find myself stuck there, that the most helpful thing that I can do is challenge that fear and acknowledge the love and connection that I have in my life, which can put me on the path to getting unstuck and disconnecting from the story. The Enneagram has also helped me better navigate my relationships with others. For example, my husband is an Enneagram 9, known as the peacemaker. As a 9, his core motivations are to avoid conflict, create harmony, and just overall keep the peace. And understanding his Enneagram type has been hugely helpful for me in knowing how to best support him and our relationship. For example, when things feel chaotic, 9s tend to retreat into themselves. So, if I notice he seems a little disengaged or distant, instead of getting upset and taking it personally, which can lead to conflict and just make him retreat further, I can instead approach it from a compassionate place and see if there's anything I can do to help him foster more peace, work through the chaos, and get out of his head, which in turn can help us reconnect. And it's like this with all of the types. Each type has its own nuances and strengths and challenges and gifts, and understanding our type as well as others can really make a difference in how we relate, how we interact, and how we navigate conflict. I wanted to learn more about the Enneagram, and more specifically, how we can use it as a tool to navigate stuckness. And that is what brought me to today's guest. Ashton Whitmoyer-Ober, known as Enneagram Ashton on Instagram, is a certified Enneagram educator that helps individuals, businesses, and organizations better understand their motivations and improve their relationships using the Enneagram framework. She's also a public speaker, community psychologist, and the author of multiple best-selling books, including The Enneagram Made Simple and The Enneagram for Relationships. During our conversation, Ashton and I take a deep dive into the Enneagram and how to use it to get yourself unstuck, including the 9 types of the Enneagram and the core fears, beliefs, and motivations for each, how the Enneagram can help you better understand yourself, your motivations, and the way you relate to others, and better understand what motivates others and how they relate to you, and how to use that information to support yourself on your journey from stuck to unstuck and improve your relationships, both with yourself and with the people that are the most important to you. Let's jump into my conversation with Ashton. Ashton, welcome to Season of Stuck. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
You're excited. I'm excited. I was telling you a bit about this before we hopped on the recording, but I'm a bit of like a personality structure junkie. Like I've done them all, the
Yeah.
Myers-Briggs and the DISC assessment and the Gallup strengths, all of those things. And I have found the Enneagram to be the most helpful for a lot of things, including getting unstuck. So I am really excited to dive into this with you and understand it a little more deeply and understand how to use it as a tool for navigating stuckness.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think that the premise of your podcast just fits so nicely with the Enneagram and personal development and how the Enneagram can be used as a tool. So I'm excited to dive in.
Well, thank you. I guess to get things started, I would love if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work and how you started studying and sharing the Enneagram.
Yeah, so my name is Ashton Whitmoyer-Ober. I'm Enneagram Ashton on Instagram. I'm a community psychologist by trade, so I have my master's degree in community psychology. And when I discovered the Enneagram, I really was just so almost like in awe of how we can use this tool to better understand not just ourselves, but other people. I'm an Enneagram too. So, as you'll learn, that is the helper. And so, the fact that I could use the Enneagram to help other people just was an amazing concept for me. So, I help individuals and businesses learn how to have healthier relationships using the framework of the Enneagram. So, whether that be workplace relationships or relationships with themselves or with their family members, romantic relationships, whatever that looks like, I think it's just a really, really important tool for learning how to connect with other people.
Well, that sounds like literally the coolest job I've ever heard. I am also an Enneagram too, so I relate so hard on the importance of what you do for a living to be helpful to other people and like how fulfilling that feels as a two. I feel that same way about this podcast. Okay, so I love the Enneagram. You love the Enneagram. We know how helpful it is. But for people who are listening who either aren't familiar with the Enneagram at all or who have maybe heard of it but don't truly understand what it is or what it means, like at a basic level, what is the Enneagram?
Yeah, the Enneagram is a personality typing system. It is very, very old. It's between 2 to 4,000 years old. It's so old we can't actually pinpoint how old it is. But it's similar to those that you mentioned previously, like Myers Briggs or Strength Finders or DISC assessment, in that it can tell us a lot about ourselves. But the biggest difference is that it's not describing or outlining our behaviors. Instead, it's talking about what motivates us to behave a certain way. So essentially, we could all be doing the same behavior. So let's just say conflict, like avoiding conflict, right? We could all be avoiding conflict, but the reason why we avoid conflict could be different based on our Enneagram type. And it's really split up into our biggest fears. So our motivations are split up into our biggest fears. So what we fear the most and what we want the most or what we desire. And so when we understand what is driving our behaviors, then we can ultimately either A, change those behaviors that we don't really love about ourselves, or B, understand and show compassion for those behaviors within ourselves and with other people that might feel confusing.
I agree. I think that the part that I connected with the most was that motivational piece because for a long time I could see what I was doing, but I didn't always understand why I was doing it. And certainly with other people, I would see a behavior, but be like, where is that coming from? And then kind of project my own understanding onto it, which is like not how other people work. So tell us a little bit more about the types. So I know that there are 9 Enneagram types. And what are the kind of like main characteristics? And what is the thing that each type fears the most? And what is the thing that each type wants the most?
Yeah, so the Enneagram is split up into 9 different types, and there aren't just 9 different types of people in the world. So I want to just like preface it by saying that a lot of people will feel caught off guard by the types or just feel like, how can this even be possible? There's so much more that goes into it, but we all do have one type that we connect with the most. And like we said, the type is made up of your biggest fear and your biggest desire. There are stereotypical behaviors that are associated with each of the types, but at the end of the day, it always goes back to those motivations. So the one, they're called the reformer. Their biggest fear is being seen as a bad person, being unethical, being wrong, doing the wrong thing. And then their biggest desire is to be seen as a good person, to be moral, ethical, right, to do the right thing. So then their behaviors are directly connected back to those motivations. The two is the helper. So their biggest fear is being unloved, unwanted, not needed, not appreciated for the things that they're doing. And then their biggest desire is to feel loved, wanted, appreciated, and needed. The 3 is the achiever, so their biggest fear, they typically fear failure the most, but then they also fear being disrespected or not being valued because of that failure. And then their biggest desire is to be valued, to be successful, to be respected because of that success. The 4 is the individualist. Their biggest fear is that something is inherently wrong with them, that they're defective, that something's missing. And then their biggest desire is to be unique or original or authentic and to just be okay with being who they are. The 5 is the investigator. Their biggest fear is having their resources depleted. So, whether that be emotional resources or physical resources, time, energy, whatever that looks like. And then their biggest desire is to be knowledgeable. They want to know the things and then they want other people to know that they know the things. So they like to be knowledgeable, but then also to be seen as competent and capable because of that knowledge that they have. Obviously, part of their fear then as well is not knowing something, but also having those resources be depleted. The 6, their biggest fear is typically fear itself. So they have the strongest relationship with fear, and they're called the loyalist. So their behaviors are directly associated with kind of analyzing what that fear looks like or what that risk looks like. Their biggest desire is to feel safe, to feel secure, to seek guidance from other people, anything that's going to help them eliminate that fear. The 7 is the enthusiast. They're going to be the most extroverted of all of the Enneagram types. But again, remember that extroversion and introversion are actually behaviors, right? So the 7, their biggest fear is they do have FOMO, so they do have that fear of missing out, but then they also fear being trapped in any sort of emotional pain or negativity or anything that's going to hold them down. And then their biggest desire is to have fun, but ultimately they're seeking contentment in everything that they're doing. The 8 is called the challenger. Their biggest fear is being seen as weak or powerless or controlled in some way. And then their biggest desire is to protect themselves and other people. Typically, this looks like their people, right, that they want to protect. It can also look like vulnerable populations, people that they feel need to be protected. And then the 9 is the peacemaker. So their biggest fear is conflict. That's not saying that other types also don't fear conflict. It's just that for nines, it makes up their main fear, that main motivation. They also fear being like separated from the people that they love or abandoned. And then their biggest desire is to create a peaceful environment, not just for themselves, but also for the people around them.
Wow. So those are all very distinct personality profiles and motivations and fears and desires. And I know that you had mentioned that while there are more than 9 types of people in the world, generally everyone has like a primary type that they resonate with most.
Right.
So, like, as you were listing the different types, for sure, when you were listing the 2, I was like, absolutely, 100% that's me. But then also, when you were listing the 3, I was like, oh, that feels like me too. So, are there any sort of secondary or tertiary Enneagram types that people will resonate with? And is that directly related to their type?
So, we should, as humans, probably relate to a lot of the types. I can sit here and tell you how pieces of me kind of fit into all of the different types. But on paper, and really the premise of the Enneagram is you do have one main type, and your type has been with you from a very young age. And so you should be able to look back on life experiences and see how your type showed up in those experiences instead of those experiences dictating what your type ended up being. But with all of that being said, you do have the numbers on either side of your main type called wings, and you just pull characteristics from them. A common misconception is that it's your second highest score, like when you take a test. So some people might say, like, oh, I'm a 3 wing 8. And that's not possible because your wings have to be next to the type. So that's something to consider is that you might pull characteristics from those, like as a 3, the 4, or the 2. And then we all have a number that we go to when we're stressed, and we all have a number that we go to when we're in growth. And that's going to be different based on each type. But with that being said, yes, we have a main type where we connect to those motivations, those fears, those desires the most, but we're actually connected to 5 different types. So we have our main type, our 2 wings, our stress number, and our growth number. It's why I tell people if they're picking up like an Enneagram book for the first time, don't just like read the chapter on your type because there's so much more that goes. Like I said before, there aren't just 9 different types of people. Even, if you walk down the street, you meet an Enneagram 2, maybe they're a 2 with a 3 wing, and maybe you meet somebody else and there are 2 with a 1 wing, like those individuals are going to be so different. And so it's why I don't want people to get caught up in feeling like they're being labeled or they're a specific type and that's how it is and they go on in their life and there's just so much more that goes into it.
I absolutely had that experience. So when I dug a little deeper into these additional numbers, I am a 2 wing 3. And when I read further on the 2 wing 3, like the 2 profile resonated with me. And then the 2 wing 3 felt like it was like describing me, like it was so on point. But then I have a friend who is a 2 wing 1. And while we share certain characteristics and motivation, there is like a stark difference in kind of our behaviors and our mannerisms and like the way that we do things. So I thought that that was really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. As well as like a healthier 2 is going to look different than an unhealthy 2, or,
Mhm.
a 2
Mhm.
that's in stress is going to look like the 8. So there's just so much more that goes into it instead of you are a 2.
I love that. I love the broader definition and like using this as a framework to better understand yourself, but not to put yourself into a box.
Right. And that's why I call it a framework because it literally is just that. And I'll just go ahead and say it. There are a lot of tests out there that people can take and it'll give them their type. But tests are only about 60% accurate for a couple of reasons. We're humans, and so sometimes we answer questions in ways we want other people to perceive us, even if we swear up and down we're not doing that. Most of the time we are. Second, we're answering questions on tests based on behaviors. And what we've learned is that the Enneagram is about motivations. So it's really hard for a test to be like, well, why do you avoid conflict? Or why do you fear failure? Right. And so it's important to really work with somebody to figure out your type or to have that deep self reflection to ask yourself those questions of why do I do this in order to get to your main Enneagram type.
Yeah. Self-reported tests can be hard. Like, especially I would imagine for certain types. Like as a 2, I want to be loved. I want people to think that I'm like a good person, all of these things. So then subconsciously, I'm sure that this shows up in the way that I answer questions on these self-reported tests.
Yeah. And the reality is that we all want to feel loved. So like I don't think there's anybody that doesn't want to feel loved. It's just is that driving your behaviors. So because of that, a lot of women in general will mistype as an Enneagram 2 because we're taught to be loving, caring, kind. Like of course we're going to be like, yeah, check, I'm caring. Check, I'm compassionate. But is that driving our behaviors or is that just like a trait that we have?
There are so many different ways to go from stuck to unstuck. But one of the most productive, learning. Learning something new can help you expand your skill set and find new interest, and in the process, help you get unstuck. And if you want to learn something new, you will definitely want to check out Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community that offers thousands of classes designed to help you learn, grow, and tap into your creativity. all of which can help you make the journey from stuck to unstuck. And right now, Skillshare is offering a free month to new members. If you want to access Skillshare's entire library of classes and get the education and instruction you need to shake off the stuckness, just visit seasonofstuck.com/Skillshare and sign up for your free trial today. Again, that's seasonofstuck.com/Skillshare. So let's talk more about the framework piece. So now that we have an understanding of what the Enneagram is, what these different types are, I'd love to dive into how to use the Enneagram to better understand yourself, and more specifically, how to use it to help you get unstuck. So, in your experience, in what ways can the Enneagram help you really understand yourself and other people? And how can that be beneficial in terms of navigating stuckness, whether that is stuckness in your personal growth journey, stuckness in your relationships, which I know is an area that you focus on, or stuckness in your career, wherever you're currently feeling stuck?
It really is going to be able to help you navigate why you're stuck. Because everything about the Enneagram is about that why, it's about that motivation. Once we understand what is driving our behaviors, we can start to understand why we're stuck and hopefully then utilize that knowledge to unstuck ourselves. So, for example, I'll just use an Enneagram 2 since we're twos. So, twos often get stuck in feeling like they have to do all the time, show up for people all the time, and then they neglect themselves. And they get stuck in this pattern of burnout, continuing to show up for other people. So if we work backwards then and say, well, why are you doing that? Why are you engaging in those behaviors that are causing you to get stuck? Getting to the root of, oh, Enneagram 2s want to feel loved, wanted, and needed. So they're going to do things in order to feel loved, wanted, and needed. And therefore, that has caused them to get stuck in those patterns. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I have absolutely fallen victim to that myself. I know one of the areas where I can get stuck internally is feeling resentful
Hmm.
because I am doing all of these things in an effort to feel loved and wanted and needed, and feeling like either other people aren't giving that same thing to me, or I'm not being acknowledged for doing those things, right? And for years, I would find myself stuck in this pattern and be like, why am I so like frustrated? Like, I love these people. I love to show up. Like, why am I like so internally knotted up about this? And it was when I started digging into the Enneagram and realizing my motivations for showing up are not just like purely altruistic, like, oh, I just want to show up for you. It's, I want to show up for you because showing up for you makes me feel needed and I need to have that experience. It really helped me make sense of these patterns that I found myself stuck in. And when I would get there, it gave me the ability to say, oh, okay, I know what's happening here. Like, I am overexerting myself in an effort to feel loved and valued and needed. And so instead of spinning my wheels and like building up these resentments, I'm going to go about it in a different way, getting this need that I have filled in like a healthier way, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. But here's the thing, you were just able to very accurately explain to me what was going on. So it's part of the self awareness thing where you are aware that you're doing this and you're aware of why. A lot of people, and I'm not saying that like the Enneagram is the thing to like fix everything, but a lot of people just have zero self awareness. A lot of people, right? And so then they get stuck, no pun intended, in these patterns and they're wondering why? Why am I continuing to do this thing that is like harming myself? But if they just looked at their why or why they continue to do that, or not just look at it, but just understand it, it's not going to be a quick fix, right? Like you might still, so I know myself, like I still get stuck in some of those instances where I'm like, oh, I did too much again. but you can pause and think back and get back on to the right track. Sometimes I like to explain the Enneagram as almost like a GPS. I know we don't really have GPSs anymore, but I should start calling it maps, I guess.
Yep.
Where, like, it's guiding you. It's guiding you. Some if you have your sound on your maps, it'll tell you when you have taken a wrong turn, but having that knowledge of why you're doing something is really what's able to reroute you, right, to get you back on the path. And I think that so many people just don't have that knowledge because they don't have that self-awareness.
The self-awareness part is huge, and it took me many years of therapy to get there. But it does help with unpacking these things and then having a framework like the Enneagram to really identify, to have that self-awareness of like, I am doing something that is harming me and or harming others. And then having these frameworks like the Enneagram to really understand, okay, why am I doing this and how can I do this in a different way is so powerful. And what I also find really powerful is that it doesn't just work internally, it also works externally. You can apply that same understanding to your partner, to your colleague, to your friend, to understand the patterns that are happening between the two of you, and not only how you're contributing, but better understand where they are coming from.
Right. And even though I do a lot of work with relationships, it starts with yourself, right? That's why I said, like, it's a relationship with yourself first to understand really the relationship between your motivations and your behaviors. Like, that in itself is its own relationship. And if we understand that connection, we can then start to understand other people's motivations and their behaviors when they don't make sense to us.
Yeah. Like, for example, I love a lot of nines. I have a lot of nines in my life for some reason, and I love them all. But historically, there would be things that would come up where I felt like these people were avoiding certain things, and I would feel frustrated by that avoidance, right? Because I tend to be like pretty direct. And it was in learning about the type 9 and learning about how their biggest fear is conflict and all they want is peace, where I'm like, oh, that makes sense that they're maybe avoiding having this hard conversation because, like, that feels really, really scary to them. And maybe if I can approach it in a really gentle, non conflict centric way, like, we can have this conversation in a way that feels safe for both of us.
Yeah, totally. Really, like, that's something that I say all the time is that it allows us to say things like, "That makes sense," because it offers, like, a level of understanding that we may not have had before. I tell this story all the time, but my sister is an Enneagram 8, so she has more of that, like, challenger mentality. Growing up as having an older sister who was a challenger or Enneagram 8, it was quite different for me as the helper, the Enneagram 2, and literally for my entire life, I thought that she was just yelling at me all the time and was just angry and didn't really like me, and really, it wasn't until I had the language of the Enneagram to understand that she was just passionate, and that was really just how she talked. And so now I can look at that and understand and say, like, "Oh, that makes sense then why she's getting, like, fired up about something," but it really isn't getting fired up. It's just her normal way of expressing language. And I just think it can be so helpful to not just yourself, but to relationships as a whole when you start to learn these things about other people.
Well, so much stuckness is interpersonal. And I feel often that you have two people who are in relationship with each other and they both want to connect, to solve the pattern issues, to figure out what's going on and get to a better place. But they're like two ships passing in the night. They
Right.
don't understand where the other person is coming from or what they're doing or why they're saying this thing in this way. And having a tool like the Enneagram that gives you that ability to say, oh, I understand. Like, it's helpful for getting you on the same wavelength and being like, okay, I hear what you're saying. You're maybe not saying it the way that I would say it or doing it the way that I would do it, but because I understand you, I understand what you're trying to do. And now I can take that information and process it in my way and respond.
Right.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, obviously, I'm obsessed.
Same, 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 same. It's like one of the first questions that I ask. Like, I'm such a weirdo. Like, when I become friends with someone or I'm like chatting with someone, it's like
Yeah.
within the first 15 minutes of conversation, I'm like asking them what their Enneagram type is because
Yeah,
like I
it's
want to understand them.
important.
So let's talk about some like actionable tips and strategies for using the Enneagram to know yourself better, better navigate your relationships, and get unstuck in the process. So I think the first thing is figuring out what your Enneagram type is. And I know you said that there are multiple tests available, but they're maybe not the most accurate. So if someone is listening and wants to figure out their type and get access to this information and start using it as a tool to get unstuck, how do you suggest they go about that?
So I think that, like I said, tests are okay, but they really are like an okay place to start. So if you want to start with a test, like by all means, I think you got to start somewhere, right? So I prefer tests like Truity, the Truity test, or the Ready, the Riso Hudson Enneagram typing instrument, because they give you a probability of that, like you could be this type, versus some other tests. When you get to the results page, it says like you are a 7. And instead, some of these other tests, the ones that I prefer, will say, like you scored 16 for one and 14 for two, and so on and so forth. And so then it really leaves the rest of it up to you, where you can look at your top 3 results and then narrow it down from there. Really just to sit with it, see what resonates with you, look at those core fears, those core desires. I always encourage people to think about themselves in like their early 20s and not about in the current season that they're in. It's very easy for people to be like, oh, well, I do this now, but I didn't used to do that. You really do have to look at your life as a whole, but zero in on the early 20s piece. For example, fours, their biggest desire is to be unique or special or significant. A lot of preteens want to be special, unique, significant, different. And so you can't just think about like how you were back then, because you could mistype as a 4, so on and so forth. So really sit with that. The first piece obviously is figuring out your type. The second piece is going to be to identify what kind of type you are. So are you healthy? Are you an average 2? Are you an unhealthy 2? Really to look at what we call like the levels of development to see where you fall on that spectrum. Most people will be an average version of their type. That's not like a bad thing to be average. It just means that you're not utilizing this knowledge to the best of your ability yet by being like an ultimate healthy version. But it also means you're not like totally unhealthy, which means like unaware, some of those like pretty negative characteristics about your type.
And with these different levels of a healthy 6, an average 6, and an unhealthy 6, how do you move your way up the levels? So if like I take a test and I find out that I am an average 2, what do I need to do to get to a healthy shoe? Is it just about evaluating my behaviors? Is it about like changing the way that I think? Like what does it take to go from unhealthy to average or average to healthy?
It's going to depend on each type and what each type struggles with, right? So, the average type is going to have a lot of pieces of self awareness, but they're also going to still struggle with some of those key struggles of each type. Whereas the average level of the type is going to see more of the self awareness, kind of leaving behind some of those other things and instead focusing on the more positive characteristics of the type. Whereas the unhealthy level is going to be all about like zero self awareness, totally unhealthy characteristics, things like that. But it really will depend on the type, because, twos, part of being a healthy two is to assert themselves a little bit more, to say what they need, to say no confidently. But other types, like eights, don't really struggle with that.
Mhm. Do you feel like with the types, are there places where each type is more likely to get stuck based on their Enneagram type?
Oh, for sure. For sure. So, you know, what and again, that's gonna be different based on the type. So, for example, like 7s might get stuck in impulsivity or really, like, not thinking things through until after the fact or, needing to constantly experience new things, whereas 1s might get stuck in perfectionism or an inability to move forward because they're so focused on things not being the correct way. So it really depends on the type but each type will definitely have things that or situations that they feel stuck either physically or emotionally.
So, for someone listening who is feeling stuck or has felt stuck or who will certainly feel stuck in the future, what are your top tips on how to use the Enneagram to identify how and why they're stuck and move through that stuckness?
So obviously the first key is going to be to figure out your type and then to figure out your level of health or your level of development. And really to what I suggest is always to look at some of the unhealthy characteristics of your type. And I'm a very like paper oriented, like it helps me to just like physically do something. And so I would tell people to underline or circle or highlight those things that you feel like you're experiencing right now, right? So start with there, and those are likely going to be also be the areas in which people feel stuck. And then from there, we can sort it out, right? You can sort out how to move through that in order to unstuck yourself because again, what is going to work for one type is going to be completely different for another type.
Mm, I love that. That feels really helpful to look at the unhealthy attributes and be aware that those are areas in which you are likely to get stuck as your Enneagram type. And to your earlier point, self awareness is really like the first strategy. Knowing when and where you're likely to get stuck is the first key to actually getting unstuck.
And here's the thing too, it's not just a reactive thing. Like, okay, you're stuck and now we're going to use the Enneagram to like get unstuck. It also is a prevention method because if we can be aware of ourselves, we might once we start to like feel ourselves going into more of that area of being stuck, we can insert, what we've learned along the way to block that experience and to stay unstuck.
Mm. And what about using the Enneagram in relationship? Do you have any specific tips for how to incorporate the Enneagram as a tool to better navigate the relationships in your life and the stuckness that comes with them?
So the thing about using the Enneagram in relationships, a lot of people ask me about compatibility, right? And there isn't really like a type combination that's going to be the most effective than other types. The way to use the Enneagram for your relationships is to understand the different dynamics that are at play, right? So, for example, if you and I were like working on a project, understanding that a 2 and a 2 are going to show up differently working on this project than an 8 and a 2 or a 7 and a 3, whatever that looks like. So, to understand the dynamics at play with the specific types versus the compatibility as a whole. For example, I meet so many married couples who are 8 and 5 for some reason. But so I could say here, like, oh, 8 and 5 is a great type combination. But what if that 8 is really, really unhealthy? Or what if that 5 is really, really unhealthy? Then it's no longer like a great combination. So it's really just important to see how your characteristics like mesh together or work together, where the things that are going to like go really, really well because of that. And then some of the things that could lead to you getting stuck as a couple or in that relationship. The biggest thing about using the Enneagram for relationships is really just knowledge, right? Once we understand why people do things a certain way. We can offer them more compassion and a level of understanding for maybe the things that might annoy us, or, like I wouldn't do it that way, but this person's doing it that way. And I don't understand why, but I understand their type and their motivations. And so I can see that for what it is versus just having that irritability or that built up resentment.
Mm. So, with that, with the knowledge piece, I think another place that all types lightly get stuck is in overwhelm and analysis paralysis. And there is so much information out there about the Enneagram. I'm sure that that information has varying accuracy and quality. So, for people who want to learn more about the Enneagram and how to use it as a tool for stuckness, are there any resources or books or like opportunities for learning that you recommend?
It can be a lot of information, and it can be overwhelming, and it can be feel like really heavy. I also sometimes say like the Enneagram is not this like comfy cozy thing that makes us feel really great about ourselves. So if that's what you're looking for, like run the other way real quick. It does tend to give us a punch in the gut, but it's the punch in the gut that we need in order to make the steps to change or get unstuck, right? So there is information overload right now, but there are still a lot of books that exist that can simplify it a little bit and to make it not as overwhelming. What I would not recommend first timers read is The Wisdom of the Enneagram. Like that is a very heavy, very research focused book on the Enneagram. There are a lot of other Enneagram books out there, mine included, The Enneagram Made Simple, which put it into more easy to understand language for the first timers. So, The Enneagram Made Simple, The Road Back to You, The Honest Enneagram, those are also really great books that are good for first timers, as well as websites like I mentioned, such as Truity or the Enneagram Institute. Those are typically the two websites I recommend people go to start.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful in kind of wading through all of the Enneagram related noise out there. Ashton, this conversation has been so amazing. I feel like I have learned more about the Enneagram. I could nerd out on this all day, but I know that people listening, and myself included, are walking away with actionable ways to apply the Enneagram framework for navigating stuckness, both in our own lives and our relationships. So, thank you for that. As we near the end of the interview here at Season of Stuck, there is just one question that I like to ask all of my guests. So, thinking about the ideal future version of yourself, like the Ashton that you are working every day to one day grow into, if she could travel back in time and talk to the current version of you, what advice do you think that she would give you on how to navigate stuckness at this point in your life?
Stop overthinking.
Yes, future Ashton, nailed it.
Yes, just do it and figure it out.
Talk about a place where we all get stuck, the overthinking. It's just like, it is working overtime up here.
Yes, it'll all work out and it doesn't need to be perfect, and just do it and stop overthinking.
I
And
love
maybe I'll
that.
go and take that advice.
I would say I'm going to take that advice. Thank you, future Ashton. Ashton, thank you again for being here. This has been so amazing. For anybody listening who wants to connect with you and follow you on social media and get your book, how do they do that?
Yeah, I would love for you to follow along on Instagram at Enneagram Ashton. We have a lot of fun over there. I share a lot of different content. You can also find me at my website at enneagramashton.com. And I would just love to hear from you and tell me you came from Season of Stuck. And I can't wait for you to learn more.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ashton. That's it for today. A huge thank you to our guests for their incredible insights, and a huge thank you to you, our listeners. We know that there are so many podcasts out there to choose from, and we are just so grateful that you chose ours. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider recommending the podcast to a friend or family member that you think would enjoy it. And to make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. And while you're there, if you loved the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review. It plays such a huge part in getting this podcast out to a wider audience and ultimately supporting more people on their journey from stuck to unstuck. And to keep in touch and access even more Stuck-related content, follow us on Instagram at Season of Stuck and visit our website, seasonofstuck.com, where you can sign up to get episodes delivered directly to your inbox. Thank you again for being here. It is so, so appreciated. Until next time, I'm Deanna DeBera, and you're listening to Season of Stuck.